All right. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and I'll just give y'all a heads up about the order of the individuals we're going to have. So we got about 3 or 4 people that are going to share. And once those individuals are done sharing, then we'll open up the floor. Maybe something will come to you that you might want to share with the group. That worked really well in the first session. We were kind of worried that we would just have 5 minutes and then be done, but it actually went the entire hour. We probably could have gone a little bit longer if we wanted to. So we're going to try to keep this to an hour, but feel free to share as long as we have time. With that, I'm going to let Marcus go ahead and share what he's got, and we will proceed with that. Go ahead, Marcus.
All right, guys, thanks for tuning in and listening. I said that I would talk about the hazards in forestry. A lot of people know that I'm a beekeeper, and it's one of the things that I do on campus. We have our bees here, and we can talk about beekeeping all day, but we're not going to. I just feel like it's an opportunity to have or to justify having bees on campus. This is a standard. So I believe it's standard 4. I'm not looking at the standards, but hazards in forestry. And so, yes, practice beekeeping. We have bees, we reference bees, we do all kinds of stuff with bee anatomy and behavior and all that stuff, the honeybees. One of the things, though, that I would like to talk about, because I feel like it can be applied for really all classes, is that at our school, there was a law that changed a few years ago where you could have EpiPens at the school. And it was basically like a Good Samaritan thing, because up until literally 4 years ago or so, it was illegal or whatever. You could be liable, for giving an EpiPen to a student, but that's no longer the case. So if you talk to your school nurse, you should be able to get an EpiPen at the school. So we have them in both of our classrooms and stationed at the door next to the closest door to the beehives outside. But one thing that's kind of interesting is that in the pack of an EpiPen, you have a trainer EpiPen. And so you can use this in class, and it doesn't have a needle. And so we go around the whole class practicing, stabbing ourselves with an EpiPen. But that's a hands-on approach to first aid safety. And then the other thing that I thought that was interesting to share, and this is a little odd because it's on my phone, and so I'm not going to try to do too much, sharing, but the Red Cross has a really good first aid app. And a lot of people look at the Red Cross blood drive app, but there's a Red Cross first aid app. And I have an iPhone. I can't speak to Droid, but I would assume that it's on Droid as well. But what's great is that, just looking at the categories, there's a section on allergies and anaphylactic shock. There's a section on asthma attack, bleeding, choking, CPR, diabetic emergency, heart attack, poisoning and harmful substances, stroke, and unresponsive breathing. So you can click on all of those areas. And this is, when I pulled up anaphylactic shock, it gave me, 7 stages of, the things that I need to do or whatever. But what's really interesting, particularly in a time when we're all talking about going virtual and we need to think outside the box, on this app, there's a section that is quizzes. So there's already a quiz established on the Red Cross First Aid app for allergies and anaphylactic shock. And so the first question, there's 1 of 5 questions. Which of the following items most commonly cause an allergic reaction? Peanuts, towels, ice pack, or water. That one's pretty self-explanatory. So it's easy, but it's just something that you can utilize in your classroom. 1, so that everybody's better prepared to respond to first aid, and then 2, because there is a quiz element to it. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk to you guys about in regards to the hazards, a lot of the standard is about identification, being able to identify whatever insect or hazard that you're going to encounter in the forest. And I understand that hazards could be a widowmaker branch hanging in the trees. It could be a hole in the ground when you're walking, but I'm mainly talking about insects and stuff that you can identify. Walt, I would like to share my screen. I think, are you the one that's able to allow me to do that?
Yeah, you should.
Oh, I got it. I got it.
Yes, sir.
All right, so here is my screen here. All right, can everybody see that? All right. So what I do is I play a little game. Can you see that? Is everybody seeing that? All right. My people are saying that you can see that. So I play Taboo. And if you're not familiar with Taboo, these are the rules. I have one partner that has their back to the screen, so I do this on the projector, and one person that does not. So I just have them turn their chairs, around, whatever. One partner looks at the screen and gives clues to the other partner to guess the word and picture. The clues cannot contain words from the top or bottom of the picture, and that'll make sense in just a second. So you can't just throw something at them. You got to play with them so that they understand the rules of the game. So to be very clear, the goal here is to guess Mickey Mouse, but you can't say Disney, you can't say Orlando, and you can't say Minnie. And of course, you couldn't say Mickey Mouse. So the person looking at the screen is giving the verbal cues. The person that's not looking at the screen, they have no idea. They're trying to guess. And so we do this. You got the Atlanta Braves, couldn't say baseball, Chipper Jones. Turner Field, that needs to be updated, I guess. John Deere, tractor, green, yellow, farming, that. All right, so now let's get serious. And so an example of this would be Black Widow. You can't say black, you can't say red, and you can't say spider. And so you've got to be able to communicate about a Black Widow so that you can walk through the identification and all that stuff. So this would be done kind of like at the end of the unit or maybe in the middle, so that there's some context that they can pull from. And really, this is something that can be done with a lot of things that are related to identification, equipment, whatever. So this isn't obviously just forestry hazard stuff related. So anyway, that's it. I can share that, but that's super easy. All it is a PowerPoint with a picture and, so I got wasp, stinger, copperhead, diamondback, all those different things are just hazards that I've identified in the classroom. Okay. And that's about it. If somebody has questions, let me know.
Marcus, if we want a copy of that, do we just email you?
Yeah, so what's going to happen is that's why we really wanted everybody to register. So Walt and I, set up this whole registration thing. And so rather than trying to go through and identify everybody in the text, please go back and register. We've got your email. Walt, Justin, or I will be sending that out. And all of the resources, all of the links that are shared today in all of the sessions and all the professional development sessions, they will be sent out to everybody. So you'll be able to access them.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions about something that we do? Or something that I did?
We'll also put any files we have, and we'll talk about that. We'll send that out in the email about how to connect to our Ag Teacher Share Drive. It was something that several teachers started several years ago, and it's a great resource for any teacher to be able to find files. I see a lot of you that have files that I've actually looked and used many of them on there myself, so we'll include that in there as well.
All right, that's it. Unless somebody has a question, the next person's up, Walt.
All right.
Thank you.
We're going to get my list here. Mr. Joey Mumford, if you'll go ahead and take the floor and share what you've got to share.
Okay. Really, I don't have anything to share as far as papers or PowerPoints or anything like that. But one thing I do with class when we talk about the hazards in the forest is I actually have specimens of each of the snakes except the pygmy rattlesnake and the copperhead in jars, so they actually can see what they look like, and the kids really love that compared to just looking at the PowerPoint on the screen. So if you can find a small roadkill or kill something that's small enough to fit in a jar, and put it in some formaldehyde, so they actually can see it and know what it looks like firsthand, that helps, and it kind of brings the lesson to a head. But the main thing I wanted to talk about was we're fortunate enough when we built the new high school, I had enough money left over to get a sawmill, and we have a tree surgeon here that gives me tons of logs, and so my forestry class, we'll take that sawmill and they'll they'll cut up the log into lumber, and it kind of transfers over to the ag mechanics pathway. Once it dries, we'll come here to the shop and run it through the planer and the joiner, if we want it to be that way. But one project that we do is we'll make wood duck boxes out of the wood that we make or wood we produce, and put them up around the community. And we make it out of pine, and obviously it doesn't last like cypress does, but it's kind of an ongoing yearly thing that I do. So we'll just replace what needs to be replaced or add to it. And the kids really enjoy it. And it's like I said, you could use it in forestry, ag mechanics, and wildlife. So that's about all I've got. And like I said, we're just fortunate to have that. I'm sure not all schools have that type of equipment or ability, but we're fortunate to have that, and it's a good learning tool. I also use it to, I've got like 30 different specimens of wood that I have collected, and I can show the kids when we do tree ID what the actual wood looks like, so they can identify the trees by the wood. So that's about all I've got. If you got any questions, just let me know. Thank you.
Walt, just sharing what somebody said in the chat. Dustin O'Neill, he has all the rattlesnake scans and a cottonmouth hanging in the classroom. Sounds like a really good SAE opportunity for a student to try to preserve some of those mounts.
That's also a good activity in wildlife, is to have students bring in some specimens to actually skin out and preserve there in the classroom. That's a good lesson too. Just make sure if it's frozen, let it thaw out good, and if you touch it, it might move on you, so be prepared for that. Any questions for Joey? Yeah, and make sure they're dead too, because somebody said they brought in a live rattlesnake. That's not a that wouldn't be a good idea either.
I've got an ABAC story about a live rattlesnake, but that's
I've got several stories. My former coworker has some stories about that too. So, okay, well, appreciate it, Joey. Thank you very much. It's a real world applications of forestry, and let those kids see hands-on is always a better choice. Next, we have Mr. Ryan Smith. If Ryan could go ahead and unmute himself and share what he wants to share. Do you need me to share your screen, Ryan?
No, I don't really have anything to show on my computer.
Okay.
I just got some stuff to talk about. I've only been teaching forestry for 1 year. I've only been teaching 5 years. I really don't know much, but I do feel like that the greatest resource out there is the forestry field day contest. That's what we do in our classes, hands-on. It allows a lot of kids to just, hands-on is the greatest way to learn. And a lot of kids, they're real successful that way. I just do what Mr. Waltrip's done. I taught with him the past 5 years, nothing reinvent the wheel or anything like that, but we just slowly teach those different things with the field days. It covers, I think, 5 or 6 of the standards. And eventually they get in groups, and we just do practicums there, here and there. And we're fortunate enough to be in Central Region. We got a bunch of different forest field day contests to go to. We carry like 40, 50 kids of those, getting a lot of kids involved. And kids seem to love it. I mean, we were successful this year in the class I taught. But to me, that's just the greatest resource out there. It's just the hands-on forest field day stuff. And also, I let kids, in our class, we do a dendrology notebook. And as we go through the semester, kids, they bring in leaves, we press them, and we laminate them, stuff like that. And they develop their own dendrology notebook they have for after they get done with the class. And with that, I assign different trees, different points. So like a water oak may have 1 point versus like a cucumber tree may have like 5 points, and they got to get to a certain amount of points to get that 100 for the class. But that's pretty much, we're pretty old school, but just following that forestry field day thing, that's just the greatest. I can't say it enough, it's the greatest resource. Even if you don't have trees, when I taught down at the middle school, we didn't really have many trees that were big enough to measure with Biltmore sticks and chronometers, but we measured light poles, we measured the power poles, we measured the baseball fence, we measured everything we could find. So, I mean, even if you don't have a lot of trees, you can still get out and measure and find those forestry measurement or teach those forestry measurement things that are in the field. So that's pretty much everything I got. Another thing I do, a lot of our focus is on longleaf pine because there's so many teaching and education resources out there on the longleaf pine, and that covers a lot of the standards too. Talking about prescribed burns, regeneration, ecosystems. I mean, you can go as in depth you want with longleaf pine because that ecosystem is so diverse. It's one of the most diverse ecosystems in the world. And I mean, longleaf pine used to cover 60 million acres across the South. Now it hardly covers any at all. So it's pretty neat talking about that. But that's pretty much all I got. Just look on the Georgia Ag Ed website, Forestry Field Day stuff.
Ryan, Amy Swindell wanted to know, is there any way that you could share your point system for the tree notebook, or is that on the Georgia Ag Ed website?
It's not. That's just something I made up. But I don't really have anything with me right now. I'm on my phone actually because my computer's dead, it's not working too good, but I can send that to y'all.
Yeah, you
Y'all
send it
send
to
it
me.
out.
Yeah, you send it to me or Walt, and we'll be able to share it with everybody.
Be good.
Thank you. Any more questions for Ryan?
Someone asked earlier, and Ryan can answer this, or anybody that teaches it can answer this. It says, Mr. Pankey's asked, in relation to that, does anyone have a good lesson that gets the kids to grasp basal area quickly?
That's a tough one. That's like a week-long progression right there doing that one.
I agree.
It's pretty tough. We just kind of hit it head on. I don't really have any kind of neat, quick way to learn that one. It's just something that kind of eventually, not everybody clicks on that one, but you can eventually get a majority of the class to click on that one.
Yeah, I think that's a hard one for us all, Mr. Pankey. Also, Joseph Nesbitt asked a question about pulling the moisture from a snake skin, that they have used borax in the past. That's actually what I use. I don't know if it's the best thing to use, but it's also what I use. Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I've used, I think it's rubbing alcohol and glycerin. It's like a 50-50 mix, and it comes out with a soft tan on those snake skins. It's pretty nice and preserved for a long time.
Bennett Jacobs seems to agree with that. So, and then Jessica Bowden actually uses snake skin tanner. So there's that.
You can also get just some pool salt if you want to go the real cheap way. And you can pull the moisture out, but that's nothing tan it. You still need to do some preservation after you pull that moisture out.
Going back to the basal area, Josh Rabelais had a good point. They use the poles at the bus ramp for basal area. That would be something that would be a standard measurement. So as silly as it sounds, any awning at the bus stop or whatever, they would have a bunch of poles. Maybe that would work depending on where you're at. All right, any other questions regarding the forestry field day or snake preservation, skin preservation, or basal area? All right, Mr. Parks, Dr. Parks, I believe that the next person is up.
All right, Miss Bell, if you willing and ready to go, we'll let you have the floor.
Awesome. Mr. Pankey, I can tell you what I do for basal area. It's kind of hard to type out, so I thought since I talked or had an opportunity to talk, I would tell you what I did. I actually draw a picture on the board where I draw the tree, and then I draw like the prism the kid would look through, and I show them how that tree would jump on the prism. And then I pair them up, and I make one kid pretend like they're standing at the pole with their prism, and the next kid is the tree. Because sometimes if you get them out in the woods and you start looking at different trees, there'll be trees behind others and it makes it hard for them to tell. But I just had that other kid not at the pole slowly step backwards. And once his body or her body is like moving on the prism, they can kind of tell how that works. It's kind of hard to explain. It's a whole lot easier to show. But basically in 2 days, most of them will get it. So that's what I do. But what I got asked to talk about was one of the things I teach in my forestry class is silviculture. And really, if you look at our standards, there's no standard for silviculture. It's a bunch of different little standards. We don't call it silviculture in our standards. Really, standards 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11 all kind of combine to make silviculture. And I just teach it as one kind of big unit with branching things off. So what I focus on is silviculture is basically practices we use in forestry before we ever think about harvesting timber or so forth. It's the practices we use to help grow our timber. So I make my students pretend like they're land consultants or forest consultants when we go through this unit. And I teach them different things. I teach them, we do a whole unit on prescribed burning and when we would use it, how we can rotate prescribed burning, how it can be used with wildlife. We do a whole unit on thinning, different things from pre-commercial thinning to the different types of thinning, like third row thinning, fourth row thinning, selective thinning. We talk about fertilizing. Not many foresters fertilize just because it's super expensive, but if somebody, that's their livelihood, you can fertilize timber just like you would any other crop. So we kind of go into that a little bit. We go into different harvesting methods. And basically at the end, after we've done, and reforestation. We talk about reforestation and how we would maybe want to, if I was a forestry consultant, begin with the end in mind when I'm consulting a landowner about how are you going to repopulate your timber after you harvest it. Basically, we go through all those little bitty things, which is standards basically 6, 7, 8, 10, and 11. And then at the very end, instead of giving them a test, I let them get in partners or pairs of like 2 or 3 in a group, and they get to make up their own land consultant name, their own timber harvest company name. And I give them a scenario. Each group gets its different scenario. For example, I could give one group, you have a landowner who has 100 acres of planted slash pine. They have this type of soil. They have, this is their budget for raising these, this timber for the next X number of years. This is their goal. It's almost like in the forestry field day contest, the forest management section, where they have to go through and they have to calculate basal area and then prescribe different treatments, except it's a little bit more in depth. I give them everything because we don't really have a lot of timber here in Madison County. We have maybe a few people who grow timber, so it's not like I could take them out to see it. I give them everything on a sheet of paper of what that land might look like. And I tell them if there's hardwood encroachment, I tell them how big those hardwoods are. I tell them the last time it was thinned, how it was thinned. I tell them the last time it was burned. And basically they have to go through and make up a very small management plan for that landowner. And they have to say, we suggest you use this type of thinning, and they have to justify it. We suggest you either burn or don't burn, and they have to justify it. They have to justify everything that is on that scenario that they want their landowner to do. I've had kids that have turned in something that says, do nothing, it's perfect. And I've had kids that have turned in stuff that is really detailed. So it just depends on how you group them together. I highly suggest if you do that to pick the groups, not to let them pick the groups. But it's just the best hands-on way I have to teach those management practices that isn't just them sitting and taking notes. They have to apply what they learn to a scenario. If I ever got to teach a Forestry 2 class, one of the standards in the Forestry 2 class is they actually have to conduct a timber cruise on a piece of property. And this is kind of that. It's like a baby stepping stone to that. They have to just come up with prescription methods. But that's kind of what I do for silviculture, because I teach silviculture in the colder months. I teach year long. And so when it starts to get cold outside and they don't want to be outside and they start to whine and complain about it, I'm like, well, fine, we'll do something else. But it's still hands-on. But that's how I teach civil, and I call it silviculture instead of like the individual standards. We call it silviculture as a broad umbrella, and then we look at individual things. You could even technically throw in insects and disorders in there, because a lot of what you're doing with insects and disorders, once you have them, you have to fix it. It's not just a being like, for example, I had one group that thought they were a couple years ago, like going to get like, they made the mistake of asking me a question. They said, is there any insect damage in this scenario? And I said, sure, there is now. And I gave them an insect. I told them it was southern pine beetle, and they had to figure out how to fix it. So when a kid, I love it when a kid asks a question too, because I'll add something to their scenario, because it means like they're kind of understanding what's going on a little bit. So you can actually add insects and disorders into this as well, just in a different way. Instead of a how do you identify it way, it's kind of a how do you fix it once it's there, or how do you prevent it. So
Miss Bell, several Rachel Kinsall and Connor Bratton both asked if there was any way for you to share your scenarios.
I can. I'm going to have to type them up, because sometimes I just make them up and write them on a piece of paper and hand them to the kid. But I'm sure I can type a few of them up that I've done before in the past.
All right. Audrey Pickering also shared that the Forestry and Forestry Field Day CDE guides have some sample forest management scenarios that you can use. And she saves all of our forest management and TSI keys each year to have new scenarios to try. And then Nathan Kyle Chapman just shared this professor's website has a ton of reference material for silviculture and dendrology. And he provided the link there. And we will share that link with everybody later too. But whatever you're able to type up, Miss Bell, I'll be glad to share with everybody.
Sure, not a problem.
Thank you.
This is unsilviculture related, but if anyone in this group teaches scientific names, I teach scientific names when I do tree ID, and I have about 5 Kahoot games that are public if you want. They're like straight from the forest forestry field day tree ID list, but they build off of each other. Like, it's like, I think one of them is titled 2019 Forestry Scientific Names #1, and there's 15 trees on there. And then #2 has 25 trees. So if you look up my name, I think on Kahoot, they'll pull up if anyone is interested in using some Kahoot games.
Awesome. If you want to share those links with me, or if I can find them on my own, I'll share that as well.
Sure.
Any other questions for Ms. Bell? Okay. Thank you so much, Catherine. Some really good stuff so far. Now we'll ask Mr. Lonnie Giddens if he would be willing to share some of the things he does in his classroom.
Hey, now mine's not really, I mean, I do a lot of the similar stuff that's already been talked about, especially what Ryan said, because I am a former student of Mr. Waldrop's. And we do just kind of go over the forestry field days, and that's kind of what I do. And then we start with tree ID and work our way through all those parts. And by the end of the year, they kind of know it all. But one thing I want to kind of share is just the classroom management aspect of it, because I know that can be hard sometimes. You get anywhere between 20 and 30 kids trying to, I use it more for like cord and board foot volume and stuff like that, TSI. You try and get them out in the woods if you're fortunate enough to have a forestry plot, and next thing you know, they're all doing the same tree, just cheating off each other. So you got to worry about that. So this year, what I started to do was I'd go ahead, and I've already started this summer measuring some new trees, but I just try and measure as many trees as I can, and I do them in different tape colors. And so let's say for example, cord volume, I have 5 different tree colors taped off for cord volumes. That's 50 trees. So I'll divide the class up, and I print off my roster, and I just kind of start randomly, like, okay, this guy's going to start with yellow, the next one's blue, green, red, orange, and once I end or run out of colors, I start over. And that way, instead of all 25 kids doing the same trees, you got them, there's might be only 5 of them doing all the same trees, and that lessens the chance of them cheating. And then you can also look at your roster and say, okay, these 2 or 3 definitely don't need to be together because they ain't gonna get anything done. Because we know we got knuckleheads in the class, all they're gonna do is cut up and stuff. So I can look at that and see where they need to be, and I know what trees they have done. They have to turn in their paper. You know, we might, depending on how class goes and if we got anything else going on, might take 2 days to do a set of trees. Like I said, I do 5, that's 50 trees each. But they all just rotate. So the next time they'll do a different color. And sometimes I'll change up if I can see those groups ain't working. Maybe they're still kind of cheating off each other. Then I can move them around and stuff like that. But I just found that helped. And we had a student teacher this year, and that helped him out. And I found it really helps with your basic ag kids. Because a lot of times the basic ag, when you're doing your forestry science unit and tree measurements, they do like to get out there and cut up some. So if you can spread them out, the more you can spread them out, the better it is, I found. And that's just the way I did it. Some of y'all, I'm sure, does it the same way. But just mark different colors and only a certain amount do each color, and just rotate through until all of them are done. All the trees are done. Like I said, I'm kind of old school, and I just do the forestry field day stuff for the most part. I'll add stuff in. Just like Joey said, we got a sawmill this year. We were fortunate enough to get a grant, and we bought a small sawmill, but we hadn't gotten to use it yet. We got it set up the week before school closed, and I think we ran one little test log through it just to kind of get accustomed to it, and then they canceled school. So we're hoping to get in, and I like the idea of doing the duck boxes, even if they're out of pine, just to and introducing the ag mechanics aspect of it too. So that's about all I got. I mean, it was more just the management and keeping the kids spread out and doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Any questions for Lonnie? A question that I think we missed earlier for Joey or Lonnie. Lonnie just started, so Joey might be better or somebody else. Moisture is an issue when you cut lumber. What do you do, Joey, for removing the moisture out of your lumber? You need to click unmute. There you go.
I got it. Really, we just let it air dry at the moment. We stack them up and put a bunch of weight on them to keep them straight. So we've already got a stack that we cut that we'll use for this upcoming year cut. So they'll be dry enough to do some stuff with. But like I said, I think some people have toyed with a solar kiln to try to dry it, but we just air dry it. And one thing you have to spray the lumber, or you're gonna get some ambrosia beetles or some pine sawyers in there, depending on the type of wood you got. So just keep that in mind. But air dry is the best way. It takes a while, but when you don't have a kiln, then that's the only way to go.
And Joseph Dean asked, does anybody have a good unit on sawmill safety?
Basically, I just say, look here, boys and girls, this blade, don't get near it. keep your safety glasses on, and just, I mean, you just got to pay attention. Stay behind the blade. I mean, that's pretty cut and dry.
I think Shane Moore says that Woodmiser has some safety videos, and they're installing a kiln. I think I had heard about that. For they're getting a kiln.
Yeah, and at Newton County, we're going through this process too. We just got a grant. We're going to be putting in a sawmill and a kiln. So I'll probably be calling on some folks.
And Kyle Wilson says, make sure your stickers are in line even while air drying. I must say, I don't know what that means.
I don't know what that means either. That's why I said I'm probably going to be calling on some folks. Kyle also said, what did you have to do to get your school to approve a sawmill? James Woodard was one time my principal, and he had the best response to this whenever I asked about putting bees on campus. And I was worried about, do I need parent permission and what have you? And he basically just said, Marcus, you can hurt a kid with a hammer. Like a kid can hurt themselves in all kinds of different ways. And so he was just incredibly supportive of, he specifically referenced, like, do you have a sawmill? I mean, like a table saw? Well, then, they could hurt themselves on a table saw. They could hurt themselves with bees. They could hurt themselves putting a trailer on a ball on the back of a truck. Like there's so many different ways for a kid to hurt themselves. And so I think that's just a conversation you have with your local administration, or it is with me. And then you just go through and say, look, I've got all these videos from Woodmiser. This is what I'm going to do. Safety tests. These are the PPE that I'm going to require people to wear, what have you. And then just justify it that way. That's my approach.
Yeah. So the issue I'm having right now is the administration and the board office don't really like the idea. And as far as the stickers go that I posted earlier, that's, when you're air drying, you need to make sure there's gaps in between the layers. And that's what the stickers are. It's just those sticks that you put in between the wood.
Oh, okay.
And if they're not even, if they're not in line top to bottom, you're going to notice a pretty good warp out of them.
That makes a lot of sense now. I'm here with two other ag teachers in the same room, and all of us were like, but also to your point, Kyle, about, how do you prove to your administration or whatever, I think there's a lot of value in being able to say, look, this is what Toombs County Forestry's program is doing. This is what other people are doing, and this is the direction of their programs. And I think that we were just in here talking a minute ago about how that's kind of a new trend for sawmills and forestry programs. And so I think that if we're familiar with what everybody's doing, that it gives us a little bit more weight in the conversations that we have about implementing new ideas in our programs.
I don't say very much, but I know for Waits Waits is teaching forestry and he teaches all that. It's a great integration from the sawmill aspect into the ag mechanics aspect. And I mean, it just is a great avenue, and we have kids that want to do both. So it really is a great link when you're able to link both of those pathways together. And that sawmill makes it really easy to do that. So I feel like it's a great thing for us. And if I don't know about other school systems, but that makes it a lot easier to sell for us, to show that is a completion to where they can go from one point to the other. And then the ag mechanics students are getting to utilize the goods that are being made to create something. So it's just pretty awesome.
I totally agree, Shane. Totally. And I know that Joey mentioned that earlier, that he has a tree surgeon that will be able to drop off lumber. If you were to look out this window, there's more logs than what I really should have out here in the backyard, because I've got a local tree guy that will bring us stuff whenever we want it. And so between the sawmill and the firewood project, you're not going to have a problem with trying to find logs from somebody as long as you make a connection within the industry.
No, this summer we had 160 pine logs that were donated from one location, 160 pine logs that we unloaded and placed and staged. So, I mean, when people find out that you're doing something like that and the kids are involved in it, there's going to be way more material than you will ever have time to cut. So.
Connor, you just asked a question, how many schools have a sawmill presently? We're going to try to put together a poll real quick that may pop up before this meeting ends to get an idea if you have a sawmill or not. That way we can have a quick tally of whoever has one or has plans of getting one.
I am fixing to launch this poll. So if you have a sawmill or plan on installing a sawmill within the next year, mark yes. If you don't, just mark no, and we'll launch that right now. If you teach in the same school as someone else, only one of you click the yes. Lonnie, I'm going to let you click the yes for us. I'm not going to drag this out very much. We have 198 people and about 140 have taken the poll so far.
Yeah, and Walt, you know, I'm a co-host on the Zoom and I can't vote, so there's another vote in there. So it's actually 10 people here in attendance, either have a sawmill or plan on having one.
All right. Give you about 5 more seconds. By the way, this is how we're going to take a couple of votes tomorrow during the business session, so y'all will be prepared. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2. A couple more people trying to vote. All right, we're going to go ahead and end it right now. So we have with Marcus's, we got 11 schools that have sawmills. So that's a very small percentage. This in attendance today, I guess you'd say. So that's good. All right.
Yeah, but actually, I would have thought it'd be less. I thought the
I would
number
have too. That's a lot
or so, but that's cool. I wouldn't have known that.
Okay.
A couple of questions about sawmills. Kristen had one about, hey, what's a good grant resource for a sawmill? Mark Lashley wanted to know how much money is being generated off of the sawmills for your program, and also how is the firewood and sawmill work affecting the small business in the community? And then Adam Jocelyn said that they never saw the poll. If we're going to go that way, where can I see those? We'll address you individually, Adam, in just a second. And Krista said same thing. She didn't know that we had that many sawmills in existence in Ag Ed. So going back to the sawmill questions, grants. We just wrote a grant from the USDA. It was a big grant from Farm to School, but that one is a little large for trying to do a sawmill. We took advantage of local grants, and even if we've written a grant for partial funding. And so even if you're looking at something and you're like, man, I can't find a grant that's going to cover $5,000 or whatever it may be that you're trying to get for your sawmill, we wrote a grant for partial funding of it before we found one that would cover the entire cost. And I can speak on the firewood and sawmill work affecting the community in regards to firewood. Our kids sold firewood as an SAE. And I personally know a lot of people that sell firewood, and they couldn't keep up with the demand that was going on in our community. And so I don't think that we negatively impacted anything. I personally will never price our stuff lower than what people are doing. But I will be more generous with the profits. So like, you know, a cord of wood, let's just keep math easy. A cord of wood, $100 a cord, you know, some of that money will be donated to something, you know, whether it's our FFA chapter, a kid's scholarship, sending somebody to camp or something like that. So obviously there's a lower cost for us as school teachers compared to somebody that's a private entity, but I'm not going to price stuff low to where I'm hindering somebody else's business.
Shane, if you don't mind me asking about your sawmill, where did y'all get the funds from?
It was before I got to the high school. Waits and I think Waits wrote a grant for it. He got some sort of grant for it, and that was one of the things that they felt would be a great deal for the forestry and the ag mechanics to kind of be merged together. That was when Chase was there as well. So that's kind of a little before my time, but that's how it ended up there, if I'm not mistaken. Waits, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, actually what we did was when we built the new building and then we redid the old automotive shop into the new ag mechanic shop, you know, you get the new building and construction grant money. So we took that and bought that sawmill with that back when we did all that construction and stuff several years ago. So that's where we got the sawmill then.
All right, we only got about 10 more minutes left in here, and Rachel brought up a really good question that maybe we can kind of talk to close this up. But she asked, can we talk about virtual learning? Some topics tend to lend themselves more easily to digital learning than others, but does anyone have a great plan or lesson idea that will work well if we have to go back digital? Amanda Rollins, I believe is her name. She works with the Georgia Forestry Foundation. She shared this link with me that I just put in the chat. And it is a game that is geared towards 6 through 12 forestry standards. And I've gone through and I've played the game from all aspects that the game will allow, because there is a forester, a landowner, and then like a paper mill operator. And it's kind of cheesy in the sense that it's like Terry the Turtle or whatever, like all these animal characters are in the game. But it really is geared more towards the careers and the path of forestry, from the landowner to the forester to the mill. And you have to hire people, you know, like you have to hire, if you're the landowner, you got to hire a forester, you got to hire people. And so you're able to look at these people's their resumes. It gives you choices when you go through an interview, and you have to ask, you know, it gives you 3 questions and you have to pick whichever one is the most appropriate. And so it's kind of neat because it'll trick you, like it'll present opportunities for you to ask about questions that are not pertinent to an interview. And so kids get scored on this. So anyway, long story short, I think it's a really good career resource for forestry. I wouldn't get into, you know, the science behind forestry. I wouldn't count on that. But for careers, it's actually not a bad thing to share with some folks.
I have one that I used in the spring. Georgia Public Broadcasting put out a virtual learning journey through Georgia Forest. And I think it has 5 different units in it, but it was really good. It has videos, it has activities that they could do, and the activities were things that they could do actually at their house. It has some worksheets and things like that. So it's a really good one that people can use if, you know, they have to go back virtually.
There's a couple of resources that are coming from gpb.org. So it seems like that's a good place to visit for some virtual opportunities.
Marvin Kersey asked, what brands of sawmills? I know Wood-Mizer is what most people have. If anybody else has a different brand, if you'll paste that in the chat, type that in the chat. Any other questions that we missed? One thing that we use now is you have to pay for it, but again, one last thing, has got the tree measurement PDFs. And I've actually incorporated that into my Google Classroom for use during the virtual learning. It worked okay. It's not something they can teach themselves. You need to teach them how to do it and how to read the table and do chord volume and board foot and all that stuff. But it works real well on virtual after you have taught it one time at least.
I'll echo that. If you're wanting to get started and you just need some resources, that one less thing forestry stuff is pretty good.
Pete Bennett's got a Norwood brand.
That's the one that we've been looking into. And then Lindsay Guy wants to know, does anyone have a unit on hydraulics? I know it is on the NOCTI exam. And then Josh Rabelais, going back to the basal area and virtual. There used to be a virtual timber cruising activity on the University of Virginia's website, but he hasn't used it since 2014. And the link that he had now is invalid. Has anybody ever used it and know how to find it? Because he would like to know with a little bit of emphasis. Hey, looks like we found it. Ashley Sapp coming in clutch.
So we have about 6 minutes. Does anybody else have anything they would briefly like to share that works for them in their classroom?
Talking about virtual, one thing that I'll share, we are trying, or I am trying to do something in my classroom that I basically saw at the Natural Science Museum up in DC. When you go there, natural history, whatever it is, you can go to a thing that they call the Q zone, or at least they did. I don't know if it's still the same thing, but long story short, everything in that lab had a QR code. And, QR code jokes aside, when you have a skull that's sitting around on a shelf and a kid like randomly asks you from across the room, hey, Pollard, what's this skull, or the fur or an eggshell or whatever the case may be, I've kind of wanted to put together a digital database about that stuff. And I know that there's a lot of different things through Microsoft, the OneDrive, whatever, where you can have a working space where you can add stuff to it. And so the idea that I've had is I'm going to have a space where I can upload videos, other links to UGA or whatever. I've just been really hesitant about designing a QR system, a Q code system, where I'm relying on other people's links, because if they change up their website design, then that whole QR code thing goes out the window and all of the work that we did is gone. So anyway, that's one thing that we've been working on, so much so that I've got a student working on plaques. You've seen the placards that are on trees with the common name, scientific name. We're putting the same QR code on those plaques. Like, that's a project that we're currently working on. So I can put in like, hey, this is a tree. It's really similar to this tree. It's on this list. This is the fruit. Look for this in a contest, whatever I want to share pertinent to that specimen. So that's one thing we're working on, and that can be done virtually.
Hey, I was this is Kevin Surratt. I was just looking at apps. There's a Service Forester's toolkit from Southern Region Extension Forestry that has forest land and tree measurements, volume tables, site index charts, and things like that. I don't know if that would be useful or not. Just that.
If you will just paste that link in the chat, that would be awesome, Kevin. Okay. Well, I think we had some really good ideas shared today. I'm sure there's some things out there that we didn't have time to share. If you've got any other links or documents that you wish to share with the group, please email them to myself or Marcus, and we'll get that out to everybody. We'll get this video post up as soon as we can, and get an email out with all the links and files and those type things. couple more questions as we going into the end. A good unit sequence or pacing guide they could share. I'm sure there will be one. If somebody wants to send that to us, they can do that. Good tree ID links.
Anyone have any good tree identification links? There's a lot of different apps out there. I know that the one that has been the most beneficial or most accurate has been Picture This. There's a little bit of a subscription with it, you know, if you want. I think you can do some for free, like 2 or 3 a month or something like that for free. But if you pay the $20 subscription for a year, I haven't found a plant that the app can't figure it out. I haven't found anything that can stump it. So I really like that app. It's called Picture This.
And so Kevin says the Service Foresters Kit, Southern Regional Extension Forestry Play Store app for mobile devices. Okay.
Also, I don't know how many people use it. I have not utilized it well, but there's an app called Trees Count, and it's ran by, I believe, Texas A&M. I think Pete Bennett turned me on to that one. And you can measure certain trees and you can log them all across the world, and it will keep up with the DBH or whatever. Let's see. I measured a tree at Camp John Hope when he told me about the app, and it had a DBH of 28 inches. So I can pull that up. But you could measure all the trees on your campus and have a database. It tracks it GPS wise. And so that's kind of cool. But Trees Count is the app. Kevin Surratt just said there's a good app called Forest Engineering that also looks really good too. And then Travis Walker said something I completely agree. Jimmy Mock needs to make an app. I will certainly use it, but I don't know that I'm going to help design it. So there's that. And then Amanda Woodich and Joseph Nesbitt both shared some good resources and a website. I believe more geared towards plant identification.
Okay. Well, it's 2:00 now. Thank you so much for everyone that shared. Thank you everyone that attended. I think this is a really good session. Our next session will be on floral design.